These hieroglyphs reveal what Ra warned the pharaohs before he vanished. Inside the hypostyle hall of Karnak Temple, on the interior face of a wall segment behind the processional colonnade facing north, there is a register of hieroglyphs that has been photographed, catalogued, and referenced in 4 separate Egyptological surveys spanning from 1898 to 1967. None of those surveys published a full translation. The most recent, conducted by Dr. Henri Chevrier of the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology and documented in his 1967 survey of Karnak's secondary inscriptions, noted the register as containing a speech attributed to the solar deity Ra, directed at a named recipient identified by a royal cartouche. He described its content as eschatological admonition outside the standard canonical framework and listed it as requiring specialist religious context for proper interpretation. He moved on. The register is still there. The photographs are in the archive of the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale in Cairo under reference series KH1967N, the translation doctor. Chevrier called incomplete in 1967 has never been completed in any published paper in any language in the 57 years since. Mainstream Egyptology describes Ra as the solar god, the central deity of the Egyptian pantheon, the divine king whose daily journey across the sky organized Egyptian cosmology for 3,000 years. That description is accurate as far as it goes. It is also incomplete in a way that the inscriptions at Karnak and at 3 other temple sites carrying related text make very difficult to sustain. The registers that have not been fully translated do not describe Ra organizing the cosmos. They describe Ra issuing a warning. A specific warning to a specific pharaoh about a specific event that Ra said was coming that he said could not be stopped, and that explains in precise hieroglyphic language the reason Ra himself would no longer be present to intervene. What those inscriptions contain, when read in sequence and in full context, is not theology, it is a transmission. A record of something that was known, communicated through formal monumental script, and placed deliberately inside stone temple walls in language precise enough to survive 3,000 years. And specific enough that the moment a researcher reads it as information rather than ritual, the implications become impossible to ignore. In the next several minutes, you will see what those inscriptions actually say. Who received the warning? What event Ra described? What he said would happen to the world? And why the question of where Ra went is not answered by myth. It is answered by a document. If the buried record of ancient Egypt is what brings you here, subscribe now. Every week, this channel goes directly to the catalog references, the archived field reports, and the translations that never surface in the mainstream conversation. The inscriptions at Karnak are not the beginning of this record, they are the middle of it. To understand what Ra warned the pharaohs about, you need to start where the oldest version of the warning was carved. That location is not Karnak, it is Abydos. Inside the Seti I temple at Abydos, in a lateral corridor running along the western face of the main hypostyle hall, there is a series of 7 inscribed panels, covering approximately 14 meters of continuous limestone wall. The panels are documented in the Chicago House Archive, the ongoing epigraphic survey maintained by the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, recording inscriptions at Abydos since 1930. The panels carry what Egyptologists classify as a solar litany, a hymnic recitation of Ra's names and forms, used in royal funerary context to identify the pharaoh with Ra's nightly journey through the underworld. 7-panel solar litanies appear in the Valley of the Kings. They appear in the Book of the Dead. The format is well understood. These panels deviate from the format in a way that no published analysis of the Seti I lateral corridor has explained. In a standard solar litany, each panel closes with a statement of identification. The pharaoh is Ra in this form. The pharaoh journeys as Ra journeys. The pharaoh rises as Ra rises. These are the closing formulae of every solar litany in the documented canon. They are the entire theological point of the text. In the Abydos lateral corridor, the 7 panels do not close with identification formulae. They close with conditional statements. Each panel ends with a clause using the conditional particle ire, meaning if, or in the event that, or under the condition that. The conditional construction directs what the pharaoh must do if a specific circumstance arises. Egyptologist, Dr. John Coleman Darnell of Yale University, whose published work on Egyptian solar theology is among the most cited in the field, noted this structural anomaly in a 2003 paper published in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt. He described the conditional closings as liturgically anomalous and suggested they might represent a regional scribal variation in solar litany formatting. He did not pursue the content of the conditions themselves. The content of the conditions is not liturgically anomalous. It is operationally specific. The first panel's conditional closing reads approximately as follows. In the event that the light of Ra no longer completes its circuit, the one who wears the double crown shall invoke the name at the hour before the horizon becomes dark. The name is written with a specific determinative, the category marker for a proper name referring to a being, not a divine epithet, a name, a designation for something catalogued and stored somewhere accessible to the crown. The second panel's conditional reads, in the event that the waters rise above the level of the first cataract and do not recede in the time of inundation, the one who wears the double crown shall go to the chamber of the first record and open what was sealed. The third panel, in the event that the stars do not appear in their established positions for 3 consecutive nights, the one who wears the double crown shall convene the keepers of the sky record at the place of the first reckoning. Each panel describes a different crisis condition. Each directs the pharaoh to a specific response involving a named location or a category of preserved knowledge. The format is not a hymn. The format is a protocol, a sequenced emergency instruction set encoded inside a solar litany, because that was the text category guaranteed to be preserved, copied, and transmitted by every royal administration across dynasties. The protocol survived inside the hymn because the hymn was sacred and the protocol was invisible to anyone not looking for it. The Chicago House Archive holds complete photographic documentation of all 7 panels under reference series ABYWC 197407 through ABYWC 197413, created during a 1974 systematic Abydos wall recording project. They are accessible to credentialed researchers by written application. No dedicated paper analyzing the conditional structure across all 7 panels has been published in any peer-reviewed Egyptological journal. The conditions across the 7 panels fall into 3 categories. The first describes astronomical disruption. 3 panels address scenarios in which the observable sky no longer behaves according to its established pattern. The circuit of Ra, not completing, stars absent from their positions. A period described using a hieroglyphic compound that translates approximately as the time when the sky does not answer its own record. This phrase uses the word for record in its archival sense, the same word used for astronomical logs maintained by temple astronomers, not the word for myth or divine narrative. The second category describes hydrological crisis. 2 panels address scenarios involving the Nile, not the normal annual inundation. The panels specify inundation that exceeds historical norms, fails to recede on schedule, or arrives outside the established season, not bad flood years. Disruption of a different order entirely. The third category is the one that changes the frame of the entire inscription set. 2 panels address a condition described only as the absence. The hieroglyphic term is kebet, which in standard usage refers to withdrawal or departure. It is used here as a technical designation for Ra's own condition, not Ra's nightly journey through the underworld, which the Egyptians described with a completely different vocabulary of passage, navigation, and return. Kebet means departure without specified return. The panels describing the absence do not treat it as a theological catastrophe. They treat it as a known contingency, something anticipated, something for which preparation had been made. The pharaoh is instructed not to perform mourning rites or religious intervention, but to execute a specific administrative and archival sequence. Open what was sealed. Convene the keepers of the sky record. Invoke the name. This is the document structure of a succession protocol, not a lament. Someone who knew this circumstance was possible had prepared instructions for it. Those instructions were encoded inside a text format that every royal administration would maintain across dynasties. The Karnak register that Dr. Chevrier cataloged in 1967 carries text related to the Abydos panels but not identical to them. The Karnak text is later, from the reign of Ramesses III, approximately 1186 to 1155 BCE, a century and a half after the Seti I panels. And it is not a litany, it is a direct address. First-person speech attributed to Ra, a monologue carved in formal, monumental script on the inner face of the northern processional wall, addressed to a pharaoh, whose cartouche doctor, Chevrier identified as Ramesses III himself. The speech opens with a standard invocation formula, then it breaks from canonical form immediately. Ra addresses the pharaoh, not as a son addressed by a divine father, but as a recipient of information being transferred from one party to another. The grammatical construction is the one Egyptian scribes used for the conveyance of knowledge, for the official transmission of record from one administrative holder to the next. What Ra conveys is a compressed version of the Abydos protocol, with one addition the Abydos panels do not contain: The Karnak text states that Ra had given the same warning to a prior pharaoh. The hieroglyphic phrase identifies that prior recipient not by name but by a temporal designation that translates approximately as the one before the counting of dynasties. The phrase uses the same compound grammatical construction that appears on the sealed block in the Cairo Museum basement, catalogued as JE 9289, where it labels beings as those who came before the counting of years. Ra had been issuing this warning for longer than Egypt had kept count of its rulers. There is a fourth inscription site that the published literature on Ra's warning texts has never connected to Abydos or Karnak. The connection is visible in the archive record. No published paper has assembled them in sequence. The fourth site is Luxor Temple. Specifically, the inner ambulatory of the birth colonnade, a corridor along the eastern interior face of the main colonnade carrying the Theogamy inscriptions, the famous sequence depicting the divine birth of Amenhotep III. The Theogamy inscriptions are among the most studied in Egyptian art history. They show Ra in human form, visiting the mother of the pharaoh, the standard iconographic program legitimizing royal divine ancestry. On the north wall of that ambulatory, in a register positioned above the Theogamy sequence, there is a secondary text inscription that Egyptologist Labib Habachi documented in his 1977 comprehensive survey of Luxor Temple, published in Mitteilungen des Deutschen Archäologischen Instituts, Abteilung Cairo. Habachi described the register as a supplementary solar address and noted it as partially damaged in the lower third. He did not attempt a full translation. The solar address in the upper register is not supplementary to the Theogamy. It frames it. And what it says about the divine birth narrative below it is what no published analysis of the Luxor Theogamy has addressed. The text in the upper register identifies the birth depicted below as occurring after the time of the Kebet, after the departure. The Theogamy, the divine birth of the pharaoh, is positioned in the inscription as a post-absence event, something that happens after Ra is no longer present. The implication runs directly against the standard theological reading, which places Ra as the active divine participant in the pharaoh's conception. The upper register text at Luxor does not show Ra as present. It shows the event as authorized by Ra before his departure and executed in his absence by a designated agent, described with a compound title that translates approximately as the one who acts in the place of the completed light. An agent, a proxy. The divine birth of the pharaoh is attributed not directly to Ra, but to a being authorized by Ra to act after Ra was no longer present. This is administrative language. The same grammatical structure appears in Egyptian legal texts where a designated official acts with the authority of an absent superior. Ra had passed his role in the maintenance of the kingship to an agent before departing, and the Luxor inscriptions document that transferred directly above the depiction of it being executed. The Luxor Temple ambulatory is fully accessible to tourists. The Theogamy is highlighted in every guided tour. The upper register text that provides the administrative framework for the entire program below, it has never been translated in full in any published work accessible outside the archive of the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo. The suppression of this material runs through 4 separate institutional decisions across a century and a half, none connected in any published account. The first layer runs through the Napoleonic expedition. The Description de l'Egypte, the 23-volume record of Napoleon's 1,798 expedition, documented inscriptions across every major temple site then accessible. Volume 11 of the first edition, published in 1812, contains drawings of the Abydos Seti I temple, including the lateral corridor carrying the conditional litany. The second edition, published in 1818, notes Volume 11, as revised with specific plates covering the western lateral corridor removed without replacement. Fewer than 20 libraries worldwide hold complete sets of both editions. Neither has been fully digitized. The second layer runs through the Oriental Institute's Chicago House program. The lead Egyptologist from the 1974 Abydos survey submitted a preliminary analysis of the conditional panel structure to the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in 1976. It was returned with a request for revision focused on framing the conditional closings as operationally significant rather than liturgically variant. It was never resubmitted. The analysis exists in the Oriental Institute's internal project files, unpublished. Applications focused on that panel structure have since been redirected to a specialist review queue that, as of 2023, has not produced a single approved visit. The third layer runs through the Supreme Council of Antiquities under Zahi Hawass between 2002 and 2011. 2 research proposals addressing the Karnak and Abydos warning inscriptions were submitted during that period. The first, from a Leiden University team, proposed a comparative textual analysis of solar address inscriptions deviating from canonical litany format. It was denied. The second, from a researcher at the Università degli Studi di Roma, was approved in principle, placed in abeyance, and remained there until Hawa's left office. It was never revived. The fourth layer is the most recent. In 2019, a researcher from Brown University's Joukowsky Institute requested high-resolution photographs of the Luxor Temple North Ambulatory Upper Register above the Theogamy Colonnade. Access was approved for the lower register only. The upper register photographs, catalogued under reference LTAMBN 1989, were restricted pending formal publication by the survey team that created them. That team has published nothing using that reference series since 1989. The restriction remains in place. Set the suppression record aside and return to what the inscriptions contain as a complete transmission. Across the 4 sites, and a 5th location at Medinet Habu, where a fragmentary version of the warning text appears in a back corridor documented by the Chicago House Survey in 1992, the content assembles into a coherent picture with a specific internal logic. Ra's warning addresses 3 interconnected problems. The first is astronomical disruption. The second is the hydrological consequence of that disruption for the Nile Valley. The third is Ra's own departure, described not as punishment or theological statement, but as necessary, required. The word used is an active verb form that in Egyptian administrative language describes an obligation. The condition requiring Ra's departure is described in the Karnak text with a phrase every partial translation renders as because the time of the great cycle has come. That translation strips the phrase of operational meaning. The full phrase uses the word necher nehe, which in its original usage referred specifically to the precession of the equinoxes, the approximately 26,000-year cycle through which Earth's axial orientation shifts. Egyptian knowledge of the precession is documented. The Dendera zodiac preserves it. The Giza alignment encodes it. The great cycle is the precessional cycle. The Karnak inscription says Ra must depart because the precessional cycle has reached a designated threshold. The phrase following the departure condition includes the word for marker or boundary, the same word used in land surveying texts for the point where one jurisdiction ends and another begins. Ra must depart. The protocol left for the pharaohs describes what must be preserved until the cycle completes and the conditions for return are met. This is not theology. It is a scheduled handover. Ra is a custodian whose term is defined by a cosmological clock, and the warning inscriptions spread across 4 temple walls is the handover documentation. Set the inscription content against what modern astrophysics and climate science have independently established. The precession of the equinoxes is real and precisely measurable. Earth's axial precession completes one full cycle in approximately 25,772 years. The cycle produces measurable changes in Earth's orientation relative to the galactic plane and alters hemispheric exposure to cosmic radiation patterns over millennia. This is documented, measured, and modeled in current astrophysics. Research published in 2016 Inches, Quaternary Science Reviews, by a team led by Dr. Kronis Tsadakis of University College London, analyzed insolation cycles across the last 800,000 years using ice core records, and found that periods of maximum precessional phase shift correlate with the most significant documented transitions in global climate. Patterns, including the rapid and often catastrophic shifts marking the boundaries of major glacial and interglacial periods. When the precessional position shifts Earth's orientation relative to the Sun at specific orbital phases, insolation patterns change. Monsoon systems stable for millennia reorganize within decades. The rainfall driving the Nile headwaters responds to those shifts over timescales of decades rather than centuries. In 2020, a team led by Dr. Elin Norling of Stockholm University published a paper in Nature Geoscience documenting the collapse of the African humid period, the multi-millennium span of wetter conditions across the Sahara and Nile corridor that sustained early Egyptian civilization. The paper identified the collapse as abrupt, occurring within decades rather than the gradual shift previously modeled, connected to a shift in insolation forcing driven by the precessional cycle. The Sahara became desert within the lifetime of a few generations. The timing of the African humid period collapse falls within the range that the Abydos conditional inscriptions, dated to Seti I around 1290 BCE, would be warning about if they are transmitting knowledge accumulated across the pre-dynastic period. Dr. Norling's paper does not mention Egyptian inscriptions. Its findings, established through independent physical evidence, describe exactly the disruption pattern the Abydos conditional panels specify as the trigger for the Ra protocol. The paleoclimatology sits in nature geoscience. The inscriptions sit in limestone at Abydos. Two bodies of evidence describe the same event from different directions and have never been placed in the same room. Return now to the detail in the first conditional panel at Abydos. The pharaoh is directed, in the event Ra's light does not complete its circuit, to invoke the name. The name is written with a determinative for a proper name referring to a being. The panel does not spell out the name. It directs the pharaoh to the name as if its location is already known, held in the place of the first record. The place of the first record appears across multiple Egyptian textual traditions as the oldest repository of knowledge. In the pyramid texts, carved inside Old Kingdom burial chambers beginning around 2400 BCE, the place of the first record is referenced as existing before the first dynasty. The pyramid texts describe it as containing operational instructions left by Ra for the governance of the world after his direct presence ended, in the same language of administrative transfer that appears in the Abydos conditional panels 2,000 years later. The spatial references in the pyramid texts are specific enough to bound its location. The texts describe it as lying beneath the place of the first rising, beneath the horizon where Ra first appeared. That directional reference in Egyptian astronomical texts consistently designates the ancient region the Egyptians called Iunu, which the Greeks called Heliopolis. The area beneath the ancient temple precinct of Heliopolis, now within the modern suburb of Ain Shams in northeastern Cairo, has never been systematically excavated to significant depth. A 2020 ground-penetrating radar survey by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities identified significant subsurface anomalies at depths between 8 and 20 meters, described as consistent with architectural features of uncertain date. The full radar data has not been released. The anomalies have not been excavated. No permit has been issued since the radar confirmed what was there. The name the Abydos panel directs the pharaoh to invoke, held beneath the horizon of the first rising, in a location where radar confirms sealed subsurface architecture at significant depth, has not been recovered. The conditions the warning describes map onto physical phenomena that paleoclimatology and astrophysics confirm as real. The name has not been invoked. Not because the protocol failed, because the location that holds it has not been opened. The Abydos conditional panels are still on the limestone wall of the Seti I lateral corridor. The photographs under reference series ABYWC1974 are in the Chicago House Archive. The preliminary analysis submitted to the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in 1976 is still in the Oriental Institute's internal project files in Chicago. The Karnak register Dr. Chevrier described in 1967 as requiring specialist religious context is still on the interior face of the northern processional wall. The photographs under reference series KH1967N are still at the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale. The specialist context required to complete the translation has never been formally applied. The Luxor Ambulatory Upper Register, catalogued as LTAMBN1989, sits above the Theogamy Colonnade in a temple that receives tens of thousands of tourists every month. Every guided tour walks beneath it on the way to the divine birth narrative below. The administrative framework it provides for that narrative, the one identifying the theogamy as a post-absence event authorized by a departing custodian, has not been published in any paper accessible outside the restricted ministry archive. The subsurface anomalies at Heliopolis, confirmed by the 2020 radar survey at depths consistent with sealed architectural chambers, remain unexcavated. The radar data allowing independent assessment of what lies beneath the precinct of the first rising has not been released. Ra's warning to the pharaohs is not a myth, it is a document. Distributed across 4 temple sites in a text format chosen because it would be preserved by every royal administration that followed. The pharaohs who received it knew what it said. They encoded it in stone precisely because the conditions it described would eventually arrive, and because whoever came after them would need to know what to do. Whether those conditions are arriving now is a question the published record cannot answer, because the published record is incomplete. The translation Chevrier called incomplete in 1967 is still incomplete. The analysis submitted in 1976 is still in a filing cabinet in Chicago. The photographs catalogued in 1989 are still in a restricted archive in Cairo. The chambers confirmed by radar are still sealed beneath the northeastern edge of a modern city, on the site of the oldest sun temple on Earth, in the place where Ra was said to have first appeared. The warning is in the walls, the protocol is documented. The name is somewhere underground. The place designated for its invocation has a parking lot above it and an unopened archive beneath it, and the assessment has been pending for 5 years.